The whisper of silk, a sound meant only for the dead or those soon to be. A glint of steel, then silence. The palace, a labyrinth of shadows, holds its breath. Echoes of silk rustling against hushed marble, a sound no one was meant to hear, yet it permeates these walls, seeping into the very stone. Did you catch it? That faint shh of a blade, drawn and then sheathed, too swiftly for the eye, too late for the heart. An intake of breath, sharp, then brutally cut short. Silence, heavy and suffocating, descends once more. See how the light dies in these corridors? Each archway a mouth, swallowing the day, spitting out only deeper night. My gaze, like the shadows themselves, glides past tapestries woven with ancient triumphs, towards doors that hold secrets too sacred, too terrible to be spoken aloud. Behind one such door, a dynasty breathes its next perilous breath. They say blood is thicker than water, don't they? A comforting lie, perhaps, for lesser men. But in these gilded cages, where every polished stone reflects 1,000 ambitions, where the thirst for power runs deeper than any river, here, even a mother could betray her own son. Not out of hatred, mind you, never out of hatred, but from a colder, more absolute necessity. For the dynasty, you see, demanded sacrifices even the Sultan himself dared not truly comprehend. What unspeakable pacts were sealed in that suffocating quiet? What depths of resolve, what chilling calculations drove her hand? You wonder, don't you? What kind of woman, a Valide Sultan perhaps, could bear such a burden? The answers lie not in cries of anguish, but in the profound, crushing weight of that silence. A silence that promises not peace, but the grim, relentless march of destiny, carved in blood and bound by the cold, unforgiving grip of silk. The game, you see, has just begun, and the stakes, they are everything. From my vantage point, concealed by the ancient, dust-laden silk of a forgotten banner, the Sultan's chamber unfurled like a scroll of unimaginable wealth. The air, heavy and languid, was a symphony of exotic perfumes, the sweet, cloying bloom of jasmine, the sharp, grounding spice of frankincense, the earthy musk of ambergris. These were the scents of an empire, distilled and concentrated, clinging to every velvet cushion, every embroidered tapestry, every golden filigree that shimmered in the gentle light filtering through stained glass windows. Gilded ceilings soared, painted with scenes of mythical hunts and celestial gardens, reaching towards a heaven that seemed to bless only this palace. Emeralds, the color of forbidden forests, gleamed from the hilts of ceremonial daggers and the clasps of 1,000 necklaces. Rubies, like drops of congealed blood, caught the light from elaborate chandeliers, casting a crimson glow on the polished marble floors where servants, silent as shadows, moved with a practiced, almost ethereal grace. The very rustle of 1,000 silks, the whisper of satin slippers, the distant strains of a melancholy lute, all coalesced into a lullaby of boundless luxury. A living, breathing tapestry woven from the threads of an empire's limitless coffers. But do not be fooled, my dear audience. Do not let this magnificent facade, this intoxicating dream, dull your senses to the truth. For this opulent display, this meticulous stage setting, was merely a veil. A delicate, shimmering deception, crafted not to conceal poverty, but to obscure the raw, brutal reality that pulsed beneath. Here, within the very heart of the dynasty, the struggle was not for trinkets or fleeting pleasures. It was for the bloodline. A relentless, suffocating game played with a ruthlessness that would curdle the blood of any common man. A game of such high stakes that empires themselves often trembled upon its outcome. Their battlefield, you see, was the harem itself. A gilded cage, yes, but one where the sharpest minds honed their deadliest skills, where every smile was a mask, every gesture a calculated move. Their weapons? Not the gleaming steel of Damascus swords, but the whisper of a lie, planted like a seed in fertile ground. The strategic deployment of a forgotten secret, dug up from the archives of scandal. The subtle poison of a well-placed rumor spreading through the women's quarters like an invisible plague. Their goal? Always the throne. Always the ascendancy of their own son, their own lineage, their absolute dynasty. For in this palace of whispers and shadows, a prince, a newborn heir, was not merely a blessing from Allah, a joyous occasion for the Sultan. He was a target. A jewel, yes, precious beyond measure, but also a blade, poised to cut one's own dynasty short if not wielded with absolute precision. A symbol of hope to some, a mortal threat to others. Especially if he was not the one deemed worthy, not the chosen vessel by those who truly held the invisible threads of power. Those ancient, unseen hands that pulled at the very fabric of the Sultanate, hands that belonged not always to the Sultan, nor even to his queen, but to the Grand Vizier, to the powerful Janissary Agas, to the revered Ulema, or perhaps even to older, darker prophecies woven into the very stones of this palace. They dictated who would rise and who would fall, who would live and who would be silenced. Observe the subtle theater of it all, unfolding in silent pantomime. A handmaid, seemingly clumsy, might drop a silk scarf, perhaps a specific shade of crimson near a rival's favored concubine. An innocent accident? Or a silent, coded challenge understood only by the players? A dropped hint, disguised as idle gossip during the evening meal, could ignite a firestorm of suspicion around a prince's health, or question the purity of his mother's bloodline. And a single glance, a glance, across a crowded courtyard or from behind the intricate lattice of a carved window, could seal a man's fate, could condemn a prince to the eternal silence of the black cord. Such glances carried more weight than any decree. The air might still carry the perfume of roses, the fountains might still murmur their endless song, and the Sultan might still sit upon his golden throne, presiding over a kingdom seemingly at peace. But listen closely, my friends. Beneath the polished surface, the relentless game of queens continued, ceaseless and unforgiving. Every smile a mask, every gesture a calculated move. For in this world of gilded deception, where betrayal bloomed like a night flower in the deepest shadow, the greatest luxury was not gold or jewels, but the absolute power to decide who would inherit the very air they breathed, and who would simply, silently, cease to exist. The air in the imperial harem, usually thick with the murmur of silk and the soft clinking of gold, had begun to thin. A colder current, sharp with ambition, now cut through the heavy perfumes, stirring the hidden fears of the court. It was said the young prince, her son, had achieved another triumph. A border secured, a rebellious province quelled. The people spoke his name in the streets, not just with reverence, but with a dangerous, burgeoning hope. A hope that, from behind my pillar, I knew was a threat. For in these gilded cages, popularity was a blade, and affection a poison. Then came the eunuch, silent as a grave, bearing not a scroll, but a small, heavy pouch. Not of fine silk, but coarse, undyed leather. And within it, a single, polished river stone. Smooth and unassuming, yet in this court every object was a cipher, every gesture a coded message. It was a dispatch from the Anatolian provinces, where the prince held his governorship. A message meant for her eyes alone, passed through hands sworn to secrecy. Its meaning? Too many men, too many eyes, had seen the prince distribute grain to the starving, not in the Sultan's name, but in his own. Too many had whispered of his strength, his justice, his right. Her eyes, usually veiled by the wisdom of countless battles fought in chambers, now saw with a terrifying clarity. Not merely ambition, no. Ambition was the very air they all breathed. What she saw was the unraveling. The bloodline, her sacred trust, twisting into a coil that would strangle itself. His popularity, a rising tide, would not lift her ship, but engulf it. The future she had bled for, the dynasty she had forged from the Sultan's fickle affections, all of it stood poised on a precipice, threatened not by an external foe, but by the very heart she had nourished. A shadow fell across her face, deeper than any cast by the setting sun through the latticed windows. The silence in that gilded room became a heavy shroud, pressing down on every breath. Each beat of her own heart echoed like a betrayal. She pictured his face, his strong jaw, the fire in his gaze, a fire she herself had ignited, stoked with every lesson of power. And in that dreadful stillness, where the very air seemed to hold its breath, she made her choice. Not for herself, she would tell herself later, in the long, desolate nights haunted by his ghost. Not for her own gilded throne, but for the empire. For her empire. A choice that would sever more than a life. A choice that would cost a soul, perhaps two, in the cold calculus of power. The silk cord, after all, served many masters, and it could bind or it could break. The weight of a crown, my dear ladies, is not measured in gold or jewels, but in the silence it demands. And in that silence, the most profound betrayals are born, not with a roar, but with a whisper. The silk cord, a thing of such deceptive beauty, woven with threads finer than a maiden's sigh, smooth against the skin. It could be a gift, a promise of favor, or an instrument of absolute oblivion. Soft as a lover's caress, yet, in the right hands, more lethal than any blade forged in the Sultan's arsenals. It left no mark, no scream to echo through these gilded halls, only a sudden, profound cessation, a breath that simply ceased. No guards were seen entering the prince's chambers. No struggle broke the unnatural stillness of the night. No plea for mercy pierced the heavy velvet drapes. And yet, when the dawn light, pale and unforgiving, finally crept through the latticed windows, every soul within these walls knew. A prince had walked among us yesterday. Today, only a memory remained, a chilling absence clinging to the corners of our vision. And she, the Sultana, the empress who held the fate of an empire in her slender hands, stood before her court that morning, a statue carved from the hardest obsidian. Her face, a mask of impenetrable marble. No tear dared to betray the fortress of her resolve. No tremor shook the hand that had, by silent decree, condemned her own blood. But if you looked closely, if you dared to peer past that polished facade into the depths of her eyes, there, my dear ladies, was an ocean. An abyss where love and desperation, ambition and despair had collided and drowned, leaving only a vast, cold expanse. A mother who had once cradled that very life had become its executioner. To save the bloodline, they whispered, to secure the dynasty. But tell me, was it truly for the future of the empire, or merely to save herself, cloaked in the grand, terrifying tapestry of imperial necessity? The air itself seemed to thicken with unspoken grief, with the crushing weight of a secret too terrible to name. Every shadow in the palace held its breath, every corner whispered of the silence that followed. For in this ruthless game of queens, where power is the ultimate prize, the cost is often paid in the most innocent of blood, and the deepest scars are those etched not on the body, but on the very soul of a mother, forever branded by her choice. The air still hums with the echo of a choice made, a whisper that began as a scream. One could ask, from this vantage point behind the cold stone, what truly drives a woman to such an act of betrayal against her own blood? Was it the venom of ambition, pure and untainted by sentiment? A hunger for the throne that poisons all it touches? Or was it the desperate, clawing instinct of a mother, not for that son who now lies cold, but for the others, for the fragile branch of her own bloodline she sought to protect from the inevitable fall? This court, this dynasty, demands a price. A sacrifice exacted not in mere gold or tribute, but in the very essence of life, in the rending of a mother's heart. Look closely. Beyond the shimmering silks and the gleaming jewels, what you see is not merely a queen, but a strategist of unparalleled ruthlessness, playing a game with rules written in the deepest crimson. A game where the only prize is survival for your lineage, and the cost of losing is oblivion, not just for oneself, but for every child, every hope born of one's womb. This is the brutal truth of the Sultan's chamber, a truth often masked by the perfume of power and the silence of the eunuchs. A mother's heart, yes, but one twisted and hardened by the crushing, ceaseless weight of the throne. It is a world where a mother can become both protector and executioner, where love itself becomes a weapon. We speak of good and evil, do we not? Of divine judgment and moral reckoning. But here, behind these ancient pillars, where shadows cling to every secret and history is forged in whispered plots, such concepts are but comforting fables for lesser lands. In this world, there is no good and evil, only survivors, and those who fell. She chose to survive, but at what cost? This choice left a scar not only on history, burned into the annals of a powerful dynasty, but on the very soul itself. For power, obtained by blood, always whispers of itself in the night's silence. And that whisper, believe me, never ceases. It echoes through the generations, a haunting melody of what was lost and what was gained. And so legends are born, legends of sacrifice and ambition, which we continue to tell from behind the pillars, forever cloaked in the shadow of palace intrigues.